திருச்சிற்றம்பலம். Kungiliya Kalaya Nayanar. I am the servants of Kalayar of Kadavur. The story of Kalayar is a wonderful idyll in the annals of stories of the saints, remarkable for Kalayar's humility and self-sacrifice. He belonged to Tirukadavur in Tanjavur district, where a legendary young boy saint in Hindu mythology by name Markandeya overcame the fear of death by worshipping the Lord. His story is that he was destined to live only for a period of 16 years, but in the firm belief that he could overcome the clutches of Yama, the god of death, by worship of Shiva, the boy did the worship daily with full devotion. When actually Yama came there to snatch the soul of the boy on the appropriate day, the boy embraced the linga out of fear, and the Lord kicked Yama to death. This is a very popular legend in the entire Tamil country. Kalayar had dedicated himself to one form of service to God, namely the burning of incense in the Lord's presence in the local shrine. This service he continued to perform at his own cost, even when he was reduced to the direst poverty thereby. He sold away all his movable property and landed properties for this purpose. One day, his wife and children had nothing to eat and he had no money. His wife, a remarkably devout woman who always supported him in his service to the Lord, called him and handed him over her thali for being sold in the market to produce foodstuff for the starving children. Now, among the Tamils, the thali, Thirumangalya, the giver of all prosperity, is a very sacred symbol. In the form of a small trinket, the bridegroom ties it around the neck of the bride at the time of wedding. It is a symbol of married state in a woman, and she removed it only when her husband dies. She would rather die than remove it from her neck. The handing over of the thali by Kalayar's wife is an incident in the direst extremity, unique and unheard of among the stories of the land. Kalayar received the thali and went to the market ostensibly to exchange it for rice. He saw a vendor on the way selling bags of incense. With no thought of food or wife or children, Kalayar gave away the thali for incense, went to the temple and was burning it happily in the shrine. By the grace of God, such selfless sacrifice did not go unrewarded. His house, meanwhile, was filled with not only tons and tons of rice and other provisions, but also gold and other valuables. To Kalayar, who was in the temple, a voice from the heavens said, "You are very hungry. Go home and have some food." Kalayar went home, but the house itself had so changed that he could hardly recognize it. His wife asked, "How did these things come here?" "By the grace of God," she replied. He was very much wonderstruck at what had happened, said his humble prayers to God, and continued his usual service to the temple in a selfless and humble way. Some time later, news came that everything was not all right in a temple called Tiruppanandal, 30 miles from Kalayar's place. A miracle had happened in that temple some time back for the sake of a lady worshipper. Tadagai was a woman devotee worshipping the Lord Shiva in the temple there. She was weaving flower garlands daily and placing them on the Lord's image. She was such a pious and selfless lady that God planned her intense devotion to be known to the outside world. It so happened one day that As she was approaching the image of the Lord in the temple, holding the garland with both her hands, her dress got loose and she felt it slip from her waist. Now, when anyone is doing any service to God, such as bringing water, weaving a garland, etc., one is not permitted to pollute one's hand by touching anything other than those offered for worship. So, as she was holding the flower garland with both her hands, she could not release them for adjusting the dress. Therefore, she just pressed the slipping dress to her body by her two elbows, at the same time holding on to the garland with her two hands. In this position, she was unable to move. As she was experiencing great anxiety and mental agony, that she was not physically able to move and place the garland on the image herself, the Lord sympathized with her plight. The image miraculously inclined itself and bent its head towards her. With great joy, she placed her wreath around the image, said her prayers, and went home with inexpressible joy. The image, however, continued to remain in the inclined posture. No one knew of this occurrence. When the temple priests saw this the next morning, they tried to put it back to its original vertical position, but could not do so. Not knowing how this has happened and fearing that some vandal might have tampered with the image, they reported the matter to the king. He came and saw the inclined image. Desiring to put it straight, he opened the wall to the sanctum on the opposite side and employed a large number of his men to pull the image from the other side in order to make it straight. It would not move. He employed his armies and elephants, but even they were powerless. He was naturally very perturbed over this. This news reached Kalayar at Kadavur, and he promptly repaired to Tiruppanandal. He saw what had happened and how the king and all his armies and elephants had fallen down exhausted through pulling the image. Let me also share in this task and exhaustion, thought he, and tying a rope around his neck, pulled the image, uttering his name. Wonder of wonders, the image moved and came to its normal vertical position. The Lord resisted the pull of power, but was powerless before the delicate pull of love. This incident demonstrated to the king and the people not only devotion of Kalayar, but the devotion of the obscure woman Thadagai as well. Kalayar stayed there for a short while and then came back to his own place, Tirukkadavur, where he continued his services. In course of time, he had the rare opportunity of welcoming Saint Appar and Saint Jnanasambandar to the place and giving them a feast in his house. Kalayar thereafter lived the full span of his life and in course of time attained eternal bliss at the feet of Lord. Such is the story of the Brahmin saint Kalayar, in whose life two miraculous incidents occurred, bringing out the devotion and service of women also. The wife of Kalayar was herself a noble character, completely identifying herself with her husband in his self-imposed service to God and bearing all privations, not only in her life but in her children's life as well. She might have easily parted with all her jewels and trinket, but to part with her thali is something unheard of and unthinkable to Hindu mind. In the memory of Lady Thadagai, the temple is named after her and is even today known as Thadakeshwaram. Tiruchitrambalam.